Okay, this video is quotes from the book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes. We'll do Jim Blockey. He's a very good teacher. And then we're going to get into Allan Bloom. Allan Bloom is real interesting. He's the guy who wrote The Closing of the American Mind. So we'll go through what that was all about. All right, Jim Blockey, he says, Teachers, It Ain't Your Fault was the name of his book. And it's about the public schools. He says, first and foremost, the most important thing in education is to teach kids how to read. The phonics method is much more effective for teaching reading than the whole word language method. So the word whole sight see method's a bunch of garbage. That's what creates so much dyslexia. Phonics is much better. I taught my kids to read. I used this book, something like Teach Your Kid How to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. It was real good. Okay, Jim Blockey. The motivation for education has to come from the student. If they can't motivate themselves, then no teacher can inspire them. As a society, we are focusing more and more on the ones who don't really want to be there and less on those who really want to learn. This would be like a sales manager of a car company telling his sales staff to focus on selling only to customers who don't want the car. Okay, next one, that's Jim Blockey. Now we're going to do Allan Bloom. And this was a great book, The Closing of the American Mind. It had a big effect. I remember this. All the adults were talking about it. Okay, he was a professor, I think, at University of Chicago in the humanities. Okay, he says, the essence of philosophy is the abandonment of all authority in favor of individual human reason. Yeah, you have to be able to do that. And most people can't do that. Like in medical talking, people are like, oh, this comes from the Ivy League or some other big university. I'm like, yeah, great, a bunch of phony BS artists at those places. But a lot of people can't do that. They just can't. Sort of like it's one thing to memorize stuff and be a good student. It's quite another to be an independent thinker. That's why independent thinkers are rare. There's 100 smart people at memorizing for every one person who actually thinks in an original, creative, imaginative, open way and is willing to reject tradition and authority. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. The 1960s were a time of rejection of the Western tradition. This loss of the sense of any distinction between what is great and lasting and what is merely clever and ephemeral is a loss that might never be restored. The awareness of what is highest and what points upward. Okay, so anyways, basically that's a big deal. There was all this eagerness to get rid of Western civilization and Western civilization ideas, but what people didn't initially realize is there's nothing to replace it. What from multiculturalism or from these primitive cultures is going to replace the things from Western civilization? There's no other artistic tradition you can put up to the Western Christian tradition. There isn't. In art, in literature, there's some good books here and there, but there's nothing like the Western literature tradition. In painting and sculpture, in architecture, there is nothing comparable to it. There is no holiday that can replace Christmas. You kidding me? Winter break? What does that mean? It means cold. Okay, Christmas means light and joy and presents and fun and homecoming. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. Real education responds to a felt need. There is no real education that does not respond to a felt need. Everything else is a trifling display. I think that's a good quote, is you learn when you really want to learn, and that information is meaningful to you. Most education, grade school, high school, college, is just jumping through hoops. The teacher says I got to memorize this for a test to get a grade, and there's no meaning to it. People are so much better off when they're homeschooled. It's not even funny. Okay, like I always joke, I can teach any medical student or resident more about understanding what causes disease and how to prevent it in just 2 hours of hanging around me than they can learn in 8 years in conventional training. And that's not an exaggeration. There's no comparison. I've had medical students come to me and say, oh, thank you. Before I spoke to you, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't feel confident. I felt phony and imposter, insecure. He goes, now I know I can really go back to my community and help them. I go, yeah, all right, you're welcome, And I always say to them before I start talking to them, I go, within 2 hours, you'll learn more from me than you did in the last 8 years or 12 years. And they always laugh. And then by the end, I'm like, did you? And then they smile. Sometimes they admit it. They don't always admit it. They get a big smile. They know it's true. Okay, but that's an important point. You learn when you really want to learn. And that's why people should be allowed, like kids should be allowed to choose what book they read. They'll remember it that way. They need guidance, but guidance from a good teacher or coach. They don't need to be forced to do too much stupid stuff. And no, the system does not know what's best for them. The system just wastes their time. It does so intentionally. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. The liberally educated person is one who is able to resist the easy and preferred answers, not because he is obstinate, but because he knows there are others worthy of consideration. There is no real teacher who in practice does not believe in the existence of the soul or in a magic that acts on it through speech. The law may prescribe that male nipples be made equal to female nipples, but the male ones will not give milk. That's a good point too. All this stuff about men and women being the same, it's so stupid, and people pretend that it's real. I mean, all you got to do is ask yourself, is your mother like your father? Is your sister like your brother? Is your aunt like your uncle? And everybody knows they're not, so why do we try to pretend in public that they're the same? It's ridiculous. All this stuff drags society down. When society has to believe in lies and illusion, it drags it down. I knew a lady who grew up in a communist country, and she told me, in a communist country, in order to survive, you have to lie all day long. That's the only way to survive. You just have to lie all day long. And I'm like, that's not good. Then lying becomes a habit. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. A society's greatest madness seems normal to itself. Yeah, like castrating kids in the public school. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. You just take a euphemism and say, oh, well, it's gender affirming. No, it's insane. You're castrating kids. You're sterilizing kids. That's not reasonable. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. The self is the modern substitute for the soul. Rock music is junk food for the soul. The most successful tarantula is not the one that uses force to discern, but the one that removes awareness. Oh, that was supposed to be tyranny. Is not one that uses force to assure uniformity, but one that removes the awareness of other possibilities. Yeah, that's the other thing too. I've noticed that most people, they can't think outside of convention. And why do I talk about it? Why do I care? Because in the end, what the average person is willing to put up with is what everyone else is stuck putting up with. So it's kind of sad. We get stuck having to put up with what all these dummies put up with. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. Authentic values are those by which a life can be lived, and from which a people produces great deeds and thoughts. There is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of, that almost every student entering a university believes, or says he believes, is that the truth is relatives. Students in this country are being intellectually maimed by relativism in our classrooms. Because we have rejected moral absolutes, the curriculum has no central reference point to revolve around and no foundation on which to rest. And that's what I've said too. You have to have a Bible-based view that man is created in the image of God, therefore part divine. Because once you get rid of that, then you have no foundation for everything. And what you always end up with, whoever's got the most money, the most power, just tells everyone else this is how it is. Money is the power to get other people to do stuff. And big money wants certain things, which are often in its best interest, but not in the interest of the little guy, not in the interest of the peasants. We're the peasants. We're the proles. We're the plebeians. Okay? So the religion and all this philosophy stuff, it's the friend of the little guy, because it says his life has meaning. He's created in the image of God. We're all equal in the eyes of God. Okay? You think the big dollars want that? No, they don't. Allan Bloom continues, the professors of the humanities are an impossible situation, and they do not believe in themselves or in what they do. And that's why I'm saying you also have to have that God-based worldview and believe in God, because if you don't, then you're kind of weak. You're always for sale. And like I said too, most people, they're just intimidated out of their convictions. Like, I studied evolutionary biology backwards and forwards, upside down, and I can tell you can't explain it without God. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. But if the students were really to learn something of the minds of any of these non-Western cultures, which they do not, they would find that each and every one of these cultures is ethnocentric. All of them think their way is best and that other ways are inferior. Yeah, you talk to people from other countries, they're totally, by what our so-called standards, ethnocentric and racist, okay? They take that for granted, okay? But somebody from the West, oh, you're not allowed to prefer your way over others. Why shouldn't you? Everybody prefers their own way over others. That's actually normal. Okay, he continues. Only in the Western nations, in other words, those influenced by Greek philosophy, is there some willingness to doubt the identification of the good with one's own way. One should conclude from the study of non-Western cultures that not only to prefer one's own way, but to believe it to be best, superior to all the others, is primary, even a natural thing. This is exactly the opposite of what is intended by requiring students to study these cultures. The reason for non-Western closedness or ethnocentrism is clear. Men must love and be loyal to their families and their peoples in order to preserve them. Only if they think their own things are good and they rest content with them. A father must prefer his child to other children, a citizen his country to others. That is why there are myths to justify these attachments. Okay, yeah, you have to love your own country, your own place, your own traditions. Otherwise, you won't maintain them. And if you don't maintain them, they'll disappear. They'll go extinct. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. Student in this country, oh, I already read that part. Okay, here he comes. Allan Bloom continues. The failure to read good books both enfeebles the vision and strengthens our most fatal tendency, the belief that the here and now is all that there is. Yeah, that's a sign of a stupid person. A stupid person only knows the present. They don't know any history. They don't have any vision of the future. You really can't have much of a vision of the future if you don't know any history. So like Schopenhauer said, they kind of live, they go with the land, okay? To be able to know history and have that big historical perspective, it's valuable, Goethe spoke about that. Schopenhauer spoke about that. Everybody who studied history knows that. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. The radical truth, a well-kept secret, is that colleges do not have enough to teach their students, not enough to justify keeping them 4 years, probably not even 3 years, if the focus is just on careers. There is hardly one specialty outside the hardest of the hard natural sciences which requires more than 2 years of preparatory training prior to graduate studies. The rest is just wasted time. And I would say it's the same thing for the medical profession. The pre-med education is a joke. You don't even need it. You could skip it completely pretty much. Biology is the most useful part of it, I would say. You should have a little bit of knowledge of chemistry. Physics is completely irrelevant. The way they teach chemistry and organic chemistry is totally stupid. You spend all this time memorizing reactions to make paint. You don't learn how a cell functions, what's good for a cell, what's bad for a cell. You don't learn nutrition, etc. It really is a joke. I'm not just saying that. It truly is. It wastes the students' time. Okay, Allan Bloom. The graduate departments are in trouble due to the shortage of academic jobs. Yeah, they make college so expensive, most people can't afford it. Allan Bloom continues. The importance of these college years for an American cannot be overestimated. They are civilization's only chance to get to him. Yeah, it's been my experience. Most people don't read another book the rest of their life other than what they're forced to read in high school and in college. I've kind of been shocked by that. To me, reading is such a natural thing, but for most people, it's not. And because of that, they're very weak mentally. They can be talked and tricked into anything. Okay, well, Allan Bloom, he talks about William of Morbickie was motivated by a concern that he might miss the most important counsels about the most important things, counsels emanating from a man wiser than he. His knowledge of the world and his way of life, nay, his very happiness, depended on the success of his quest to get to Aristotle's real meaning. Aristotle is considered by a lot of people the smartest man who ever lived. Other people will say Newton, and there's a few other candidates for that title, but he's up there. Okay, Allan Bloom, he did his translation of Plato's Republic. Okay, Allan Bloom continues. Plato intended his works essentially for the intelligent and industrious few, a natural aristocracy. Okay, and Schopenhauer said something like that too. There's the aristocracy of educated people. There's the aristocracy of money. There's this aristocracy of power in other ways. All right, Allan Bloom continues. What do we read for? We seek an enlargement of our being. We want to be more than ourselves. In reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. Those of us who have been true readers all of our life seldom realize the fully realize the enormous extension of our being which we owe to authors. We realize it best when we talk to an unliterary friend. He may be full of goodness and good sense, but he inhabits a tiny world in which we should feel suffocated. Okay, so that's it for Allan Bloom, and that came primarily from The Closing of the American Mind, which was a great book. So hope that was interesting.